And welcome everybody. Hello, hello, hello. I muted everybody while we started, so if you'd like to unmute yourselves when you're ready to talk. Happy New Year, one and all. Great to see everybody. I must confess, I was wondering whether, post-holiday blues would have kicked in or whether people wanted to get off to a good start for the new year. It's lovely to see you all. Did we all have a good time over Christmas? As good as possible?
Okay. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, we it was extremely quiet. We were going at one stage to try and see my son and his family up in London, maybe spend the day with them, but Boris put paid to that in a New York second. So there we go. Anyway, hello, welcome, and what a year. A way to start a year in complete lockdown once again. I'm not certain anybody saw that particularly coming. I thought, as per my email, we might discuss, given it's routine at this time of year, to look ahead and make some predictions and put out our wish lists. So I thought it'd be a good idea if we could work out quite what everybody's looking forward to, whether there's optimism in the air, whether there's nervousness, gloom. We have a far from friction-free trade agreement with the EU. In other words, there's an awful lot to grapple with, not just the pandemic. Who'd like to kick off? Who'd like to suggest quite what they're looking forward to in 2021? Don't make me point. It's like a teacher, isn't it?
It is. You have to. Yeah.
Okay, come on, somebody.
Keep quiet.
Step up.
Nick, I've got two bits of good news.
Oh, well, the good news is excellent.
Yeah, they both came in through LinkedIn, and I jotted them down because I think we've all got an appetite for some good things to happen this year. There's a company called West Cumbria Mining who are based in Whitehaven, and they've had planning permission to actually go ahead with a new coal mine for metallurgical coal, which is going to be used in the steel industry. And I have asked them if that's the British steel industry or whether any of it will be exported. And also a company called the Acres Creative Engineering Solutions, who are Melbourne, which is UK. I don't know where Melbourne is in the UK, but they've just successfully completed their first export to the EU. And the MD thought it was worth putting on LinkedIn. So there are good things happening, and I think we need more news of other good things.
No doubt about that. What's your prediction, though, Adrian? And what's your wish? What would you like to see happen for yourself and for manufacturing in 2021?
Well, I'd like to win some new clients in manufacturing. There's no doubt about that. And I think one of the only ways to get them is to start shouting about good news. We've all had it up to here for the best part of 12 months now about bad things. And I'm glad to see Greg Wallace on a new series on the TV with the Insider Factory as well. There's been a bit of discussion about that on LinkedIn, and it seems to be one of those programs that's well liked. And I think certainly from a junior point of view, it's good to get kids involved. There's definitely future in British manufacturing. So I'd certainly like to see that pushed wherever we can.
Yeah, I interviewed Stephen Phipson of Make UK today, and Kara Haffey, who's the manufacturing lead at PwC. It's about a survey that's going to be released on Monday, so I can't sort of go into specifics. But Phipson was feeling pretty upbeat about life, and he thought that we're very definitely going to see a change in the landscape of manufacturing in the coming year, particularly around the way supply chains operate. And of course, vital to that is going to be some kind of industrial strategy from the government that makes sense. And even though we haven't really heard from BEIS over the last few months, but I suspect obviously the focus has been on Brexit and on COVID. So it's hardly surprising, but I believe we're going to be hearing quite soon about their rejigged industrial strategy, and they're under a lot of pressure to be quite creative with what they're going to come up with. Who else has got some thoughts about the coming 12 months and what it's going to mean to them, their business, and to UK manufacturing?
Can I sort of ask a question, please, Nick? Of
course you can,
assembled?
Ewan. Welcome.
Thank you, and happy New Year to everybody as well. So my question really is: does, in effect, the assembled, do they think there are going to be more opportunities from a sort of domestic supply chain? Picking up on sort of one of the points that you've made there, are they eyeing that sort of opportunities for growth, which are going to be more domestically led? As the, let's say, supply chains associated with the EU in particular are more unstable or increasingly sort of unstable or wrapped up in an increasing amount of red tape in the short term. And do you think, therefore, some of the tier one suppliers might be looking closer to home, and that creates more opportunity for domestic-based businesses? That's just a general sort of question, really.
Well, every
go for it.
discussion that I've had recently with manufacturing SMEs has been around the domestic growth, to a point where I know of two that are already sourcing for estimators for what they're expecting the coming barrage of influx of work, potential work that's quoted, needs to be quoted.
That's interesting.
Yeah, from what I've heard. Yeah.
Richard, you've put your hand up.
Yeah, what's great is we found out today we do all the refurbishment for Premier Inn, all the furniture components. China used to cost £2,000 for a container. It's now £7,000. So it's likely all the business is going to get pulled over to the UK. So there is the opportunity that China is now sort of at the end of what it's as a world manufacturer. The other side is if we can mass customize and we can take on the digital transformation, the UK has great potential to be supplying to tier one, to be able to supply at speed, supply customized, and supply quality. And I see China is going to lose a lot of its manufacturing to England, and hopefully England is a lot more successful over the next couple of years.
Anybody got any thoughts on that? One thing that worries me a great deal about any kind of barriers to trade, and of course we've seen a lot of them go up with the agreement with the EU, is that it tends to raise prices. And I think, Richard, I'm sure you'd agree that it's not just about access to bigger and better contracts, but we've also got to be better, more competitive, not cheaper, but competitively priced, and avoid the risk of prices rising inside our own particular free trade area. Does anybody see that as a danger, that prices can go up? Will the temptation be there?
I'd just like, if I may, just to quiz Richard about that 2 to 7,000. Are you talking about? You're just talking about shipping costs, are you? Over what period?
This is furniture. I don't know the weight of the container,
okay.
But the company that buy it at the moment have now been penalised with a £7,000 bill to get it sent over from China, which is where they were sourcing all the new build for Premier Inn. And now Premier Inn are now looking at wanting to use the UK as the sole supplier as opposed to just China. The other one that I'd certainly say for this year is online sales. The government's absolutely battering us with the third lockdown. Is unless you've got online presence and online sales, you are going to very much struggle this year.
Yeah, it's remarkable how I've seen a number of companies do that and discover that there's, it's not just for B2C, B2B can benefit massively from a streamlined online presence, e-commerce presence.
And that is interesting, Nick, because I've been doing some digital strategy work this past week from other sectors, but also brought it back to the manufacturing sector. And I found something out that was quite interesting to me around in particular, digital advertising and marketing within manufacturing. It surprised the hell out of me. Can't go into it in a minute because I'm going into it even deeper. But there is, for me, I think there's some opportunity.
Maybe we'll pick up on that offline sometime, Adam. That's really interesting. Just like to say hello to Simon in Washington, D.C. I hope things have calmed down a bit, Simon. There was a little local difficulty yesterday, I believe.
Oh,
that should work now.
Good, yes, it is.
I am not actually in Washington, D.C. I came over to Europe just before Christmas.
You did. Oh, of course you did. Yes.
So that in itself was a very interesting experience because generally speaking, without going into the full details of the story, basically every country that I was in didn't care where I was going so long as I wasn't staying. And so long as I was moving on, they didn't want to know anymore. And the funny part was I was actually going into France via Geneva. There's a land border, and the land border between Switzerland and France had nobody. There weren't even there. Normally there are guards there standing around drinking coffee. There was nobody there. So ironically, the only country on my journey that didn't know I was there was the one that I was staying in. But anyway, the little upset yesterday. Yes, I mean, goodness alone knows where that's going to go. And we could spend the next half day talking about it. Fortunately, there wasn't more violence.
Right. So, okay. Get back to Ewan's point about his question about whether there's going to be a lot more local sourcing. Anybody else? Barry, have you got any thoughts on this up there in the Northwest? You got any contribution to make on that?
I think it's really too early to say. And I have a concern more around our culture. And you talked about prices increasing. You know, if we see an opportunity to increase the price, we'll increase the price. I think that's a bit of a short-termism. You know, if it gets comfortable within a trading block, you know, we are still considerably more expensive than the rest of the world. You know, and we were talking about this yesterday with Be the Business that I'm involved with, and it's how do we get it across to, you know, SMEs, owners, managers out there that we've got to educate ourselves around the productivity puzzle. You know, and it was one idea that was floated is like, you know, why did people stop smoking? I never smoked, but, you know, the smoking adverts used to scare the life out of me. I'm guessing that's why a lot of people started to stop. You know, we almost need that for UK PLC, UK industry to say that if we don't change, you know, what are we now? Something like 30-something most productive nation in the world. You know, productivity stats, and you can argue them all you like, guys, and carve them up whichever way, but we're not as good as others, you know. And I don't see anyone, you know, yes, we've got our sovereignty back, hey, you know, we can fish, you know, but I don't see us having this desire to better ourselves. We're still a very comfortable nation that's run by unions and, you know, with a culture of, you know, if I don't have to work, I won't work. And other nations around the world, you know, are still developing and hungry. So I think we've got to stay on our toes. You know, we've got to, if we can develop, you know, the wise people would be looking at what we've imported over the last few years and gone, right, okay, I'm going to set up a factory developing that in the UK and we'll never have to import it. But I think we take the shortest route possible, don't we? You know, we're a really productive nation between 9 and 5:05, I always say.
That's really what I was getting at, Barry. I think you put it very well. And I think that what Richard said about this, the opportunity like Premier Inn's coming along, in many ways, this is, you know, the seismic shock that was caused to those attenuated supply chains by COVID, when all of a sudden the smooth operation of the supply chains all ground to a halt. This is almost a once in a lifetime opportunity to prove that we can do everything better, faster, with better service attached, and still make it reasonable. If I'm not suggesting you do this, Richard, but if anybody else tripped over an opportunity like that and used it as an excuse to raise their prices, well, sooner or later, we'd just be going back to the offshoring again, and they'd be finding other ways of doing it. We have to prove, as Barry suggested, that we can unlock this productivity puzzle. We can do things competitively, and who knows? I don't know whether we've got enough muscle as well as the will, as Barry suggested, to actually grasp these opportunities as they come through. I mean, I know people I run across are saying, yeah, let's go for it. But, there are so many hundreds of thousands of factories out there who may not necessarily want to follow suit. And as for the national economy's point of view, I think we really do need, as Barry suggested, to get a grip on this. Who else has got some thoughts? John Hardwick, hello to you, please. Yeah.
Good evening again, Nick. I've missed a few of the meetings, but pleased to be here again. Thanks. So the only point I was going to make is I have seen some signs of some of the manufacturers we work with West that they've seen the impacts of putting people on furlough, and it has really made them think about the value-added versus non-value-added activities and roles they have in the organisations, and that they can, with reduced volume through the lockdown, but even greater reduced headcount, that they can actually still get the output out that they need. And I think that's an opportunity not to be missed, that they're actually thinking about productivity in terms of the more productive employees and the more productive roles that they have. And we've got some inquiries coming in that way to help them do that diagnosis and implement some changes to their structures. So I think that's one of the positives, that if there are any that have come out of COVID, I think looking at what they can achieve with reduced manpower.
Yeah. The silver linings are few and far between, but I think that's a new way to do business, and added to which the growing acceptance of doing business digitally, even if it's just talking to your workforce and having to rearrange a workforce that's working from home, is making people aware that digital industrial technologies will make a difference too, and hopefully that will accelerate, and that will be another benefit coming out of this terrible pandemic. Who else has got some thoughts about 2021? Barry, hi.
No, listen, 2021, I'm looking forward to 2022. That'll be the highlight. But how do we create the UK? I mean, this is what I had a little session around yesterday, and I talked about, can we point out the consequences? Richard Hagan is a maverick. He's ahead of the game. Well, he's a maverick in the UK. He's probably, on it with other countries as well. It's amazing what Richard does. But I'd use him as an example and say, be more like Richard. And if you don't, fast forward to 2035, your business won't be around. How do we get the guys that, have a flat cap and a Whippets basket in the corner that are running a metal batching shop to go and educate themselves and become more productive? Even these small 1-2 man bands. How do we do that? Is 2021 the opportunity to, we're backs against the walls, we're on the beaches, let's fight? But how do we shock people into doing it? Question.
Well, I suppose one answer for that is natural selection. We operate in a capitalist market, and if they're that bad, then they should go out of business. And we should have better managers and leaders coming through, ready to pick those businesses up. You've got to change the culture, and sometimes that means changing the people. And you've got to let natural selection take its course there.
I'm a bit too or for on that one, because natural selection could mean that you could have a good product that's gone and done and dusted because of the lack of culture and leadership within the business. So we've missed an opportunity. So I'm swings and roundabouts on that one. It's because we can deal with leadership and and people, but it's about getting to know and understand them. For me, as I've said before, is around we've had this discussion before around giving the industrial strategy the clout that they need to deal with stuff within the business, cross-party political strategy that is longer than 4 years. Having membership organisations like Make UK, Made in the Midlands, and all of them come together and be aligned on what they are delivering. So we are absolutely passing it through. So we're not splintered across. We are absolutely aligned. I can remember sitting at the Rico Arena talking. I think there was a lad from a KM&T there. So I'm going back a few years now, where they were talking about the strategy of what was coming through, and we were all saying, well, "Okay, show me the action. Show me where that's filtered through. Show me who's accountable." And they can't do it, and that's some of the problem as well. So you know, for me, my thing for me is I want something really done on that industrial strategy to give it more clout, so it really is pushing and really is firing on all cylinders. It's not just a talking shop, because it just seems to be a talking shop after talking shop for me.
I agree with you, Adam. If I could just add a point of information, I mean, what Vince Cable in his pamphlet, and I think I shared the link to it, but if not, I'll do it again afterwards. One of his 10-point plan, and a lot of it was just stuff we talk about every week, but one of them was that the Industrial Strategy Council, which does exist, but he said it should have statutory powers, and sit pretty much alongside sort of Bank of England level, very high up, and given much more prominence. And I thought that was probably the most positive and attractive suggestion he made, because it would put industry where it belongs, at the top table with finance. Anybody else?
Yeah, so
Ewan, sorry.
so there are so many changes. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Niraj, please. You started.
So I said there are so many changes, because of COVID, because of Brexit. The environment is not the same what it used to be, maybe 2 years ago. So businesses, manufacturers will have to adapt fast. And what I have seen in the conversations with people is that the time from idea to execution has actually come down massively. So at least that's a silver lining this COVID has had. The people, from the time they get an idea and from the time it actually gets into execution, it has been cut down massively. And when Richard alluded to digital transformation, I think those new technologies will have a key role to play. But then Adam also spoke about the mindset. So which is absolutely key. Mindset is key. Then will come the tool set and the skill set. But the mindset to adopt new things is really critical to survive this fast-paced change that is happening all around us.
Thank you, Ewan.
Well, I was just going to add, I think, sort of picking up on a number of the points already made. I mean, but sort of Barry's point about almost starting from the bottom up. We've got 15, 20 people on this call. I think if you sort of asked us all individually, do we want to sort of make positive change, or do we want to drive something? Are we trying to improve the productivity of our businesses? Are we trying to improve the productivity of our people? Then the answer probably is going to be yes. So how do you sort of that multiplier effect? You're throwing a pebble into the pond and you're seeing the ripple effect going out. I think all of us, let's say as individuals, want to do that and drive that change. And then, and that seems, let's say, on an individual basis or an individual company basis, achievable. But then you go, but how do you then apply that to this amorphous mass of SMEs, or this amorphous? And then suddenly you get into, okay, well then we need to get that sort of that strategic piece that Adam was referring to, and proper leadership, and then this is where I'm almost going to say I think there's a role for you, Nick, because what's his name, that you did send over the 10-point plan from Vince Cable. So he's got a 10-point plan. Make will have, the top 5 things that they want. The CBI will have the top 3 things that they want, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, we need almost the media to sort of pull these things together and hold each of those bodies almost to say, look, consistently, this is what we, require as the body of manufacturers or engineering or industrial businesses. And it's crazy, that CBI, that you're sort of pushing your own thing at the expense of what the IOD are doing or Make are doing, etc. Why can't we be consistent about that? because I just cannot believe, given how successful, let's say, the fishing industry at 0.01% of GDP have been in driving, let's say, the agenda, and the amount of column inches that they get compared to the amount of column inches that we get as manufacturers, and engineering businesses. We do a bloody awful job at sort of, basically banging the drum, and not just banging, despite the ventilator challenge. Unfortunately, so I guess, there's the top down, which is sort of the industrial strategy piece. There's the bottom up, which we're all doing in our day jobs and individually anyway. And then there's the piece in the middle where I think we need to get more engaged with the media, whatever that means, and starting with you and saying, right, come on, let's have a more consistent approach. How are we going to get this out there? What are we going to, what's going to be the simple mood music or the drum beat that we're going to try and just, then take away individually and then collectively in order to try and drive some of that change. Otherwise, the danger is, we carry on doing it individually, but we carry on being frustrated, from a top-down perspective.
Yes, I think that's the danger of multiple voices. It's across the piece, actually, that it's a very typical British thing, unlike in Germany, where they've got more or less a single voice in manufacturing and engineering. We just got so many different bodies, and everybody's, they're all little businesses. A lot of these things are not just they're not just lobby groups or ginger groups. They're actually little businesses. They're all competing against each other, and I just think it's a bit ridiculous. I just want to pick up on what John Hardwick was saying about the possibility of if people don't get it right, they'll go out of business. I have a strong suspicion, and it may just be suspicion. I'd like some evidence, some feedback on it, that after the 2008-9 financial crisis, an awful lot of companies that that perhaps should have gone under, if I'm horrible phrase to use, but were kept alive by banks who didn't want to call in the loans, so that there's the so-called zombie companies. Because if I'm right, there's an awful lot of talent, an awful lot of energy, which is being stored up in bad companies, which, were it to be released, could prove, we'd see a lot more skilled people coming on the market. And I'm just wondering, is that a fantasy, or is it true that there are a lot of zombie companies out there who just manage to get by? They're almost becoming lifestyle companies. Anybody got any info on that could support that? Yeah, Julian.
I'm not sure specifically about that, but I just think the interesting, well, several things have been said, but specifically on that, Nick, I think that it's quite difficult for manufacturing companies to attract equity investment because they're in competition with other types of organization that can provide a faster, better return. So a lot of manufacturing companies, and I'm not manufacturing, and you all can tell me if this is not the case, but sort of wearing my investor hat, I might get fascinated, even if I would hear about it, and I wouldn't hear about a manufacturing company. There's no visibility of, in the same way that there is about tech companies and other more overtly investable enterprises that you see. Sometimes on crowdfunding platforms, you'd see a startup innovation, but that's just a tiny part of the manufacturing industry, obviously. So where does everybody go? They go to banks, and so they load their balance sheet with debt, as you say, Nick, and they just struggle with cash flow for that. Whereas the smartest thing would be to attract equity investment and reduce the servicing of the debt, which everybody seems to have to carry. So I just think the interesting thing is how, to what extent, just going back to Barry's point, which was really good about, what drives productivity. And I was just thinking, the UK is an incredibly expensive place to live and work, sort of salary costs, housing, and it doesn't matter whether the center of gravity is being moved from London to the, further north in the country. The housing costs and everything are just incredibly expensive in relation to other countries. So what else do you do in in productivity? And the answer's got to be, to a certain extent, investment in technology and innovation and efficiency in that area. And brings me back to what I was saying about equity investment. You know, I mean, why isn't there higher visibility? So, you know, one of my you know, sort of wishes for the year, and you know, it's been said of you, Nick, I think it is a media thing to raise the profile. But while you were talking at the beginning, I was just thinking, I wonder if someone's, you know, Adam, you're really good on the research stuff. You know, I'd just be fascinated to know, as a percentage of risk capital that is invested in the UK, let's say over the last 3 years, what percentage of that went into manufacturing? I have no idea, but my guess is it's pretty small.
Ewan, you know I'm going to ask you if you've got any views on that, because you have an interest in this.
Yeah, I do. Yes. Well, I'll have to dig out the numbers, but I mean, I think from a bank funding perspective, something like less than 5% of all bank funding goes to SMEs. So now that's not specifically, I'm going to say, in the manufacturing space, but that gives you an idea of the concentration of the weight of capital that is not supporting, let's say, you know, our manufacturing businesses as a subsection of SMEs. And I think a lot of that, and I tried to raise a fund last year, in fact, which was focused on, it was the British equivalent of the Mittelstand. So it was focused on, you know, the mid-sized UK corporates. And, you know, looking back at the history of it, that's how ICFC, which is the precursor to 3I, was founded. Because the Macmillan Gap, you know, going back to the 1920s, was all about where do companies go for the sort of almost like the growth funding piece. And we've tried time and time again, I say we collectively, sort of via the economy, to try and seed that. And I think, you know, that almost then comes back to needing to be one of the 10-point plans. The fact that, you know, there are some interesting opportunities to invest, but you've got to be tapped into those networks. You've got to know where to look, you know, and everyone focuses on startups and becoming a unicorn and technology, rather than, because everybody wants to be associated, and the politicians in particular, in you know, being associated with a business that's got exponential growth, and ignore the fact that only 1 out of 100 that might happen to. But, you know, getting involved in a business that's, let's say, a 10 million turnover, which is going to grow by 5%, well, that's not a very exciting story from an equity investor or from a political perspective, you know, and therefore they tend to get forgotten.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
I think some of those statistics, Ewan, of low percentage in SMEs is just for the simple reason that a lot of small companies just don't have balance sheets that banks can look at. They don't have the longevity of trading. You know, I've tried to raise bank debt for businesses, and it's quite a struggle if you don't have a number of years of trading history or a balance sheet or track record, because there's a degree of risk averseness. And why should the banks take a high risk? That's not their primary purpose. It's venture capitalists and other sources of capital that should be taking the risk.
Well, one of the things, sorry, sorry, Alex, excuse me. I just on that. I mean, one of the things I am encouraged by, and which I think we will see, I hope we will see, and will have a significant impact, is, you know, a number of these SME-focused challenger banks. You know, you've got Alba Bank up in Scotland, you've got B North in Manchester, you know, which are, I'm going to say, a bit like Revolut have done from a consumer perspective, sort of going back to basics in terms of localized relationship banking. And, you know, I'm sure we've all seen it. You know, if you bank with any of the bigger banks, you ask your local bank manager a question, they'll have to defer up to a centralized credit committee, you know, and the bank will have decided that it doesn't want to invest in a particular sector, or, you know, you're too small to bother with, etc. So I am hopeful and sort of optimistic that some of these challenger banks will actually be able to steal a march. And I'm going to say, I know we're still talking predominantly about debt, but we'll be able to create sort of networks within smaller, conurbations or cities or geographical areas, and actually provide a lot more flexible sort of capital to businesses to support them. And I think that's going to grow over the next 12, 24, 36 months.
Interesting. Alec, were you going to make a point?
Just clean up on the 2008 financial crisis. 1.7 trillion pounds went missing on loans secured against property. What could possibly go wrong? So you've got this whole, that we've got an 18th century banking system that's still working on mills in North, and the world's moved on, and the banks are not responsive to the modern world. Our IP is our asset. In banking terms, it has no value. It seems a bit crazy. We're encouraged to go out and innovate and develop and patent and all these other things, but when it comes to the crunch, when you try to raise funds based on your balance sheet, which is effectively IP, there's very little interest. That's the problem.
Okay. Are you not quite sure whether you agree?
I was just going to add one point to that. One of the things that's increasingly common in the US across all sectors is the independent valuation of IP for the purposes of creating a balance sheet asset for exactly that purpose. So
who does that? I mean,
there are now quite a few companies. One of the first, it was a company called MCAM, but there are now a number of companies who will do a particularly patent. It's predominantly patents, but it can also spread down to trademarks depending on the product category. But it's essentially a process of providing an independent valuation of the intellectual property of the organization, with the very specific purpose of adding it to the balance sheet as an asset.
And the banks go along with that, and they recognize it, et cetera, et cetera.
Not all of them, but enough of them.
And Simon, has it been sort of catalyzed by a change in accounting standards, a way in which you can legitimately treat an IP or an asset?
Most certainly, yes.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. The things like it actually, it's one of those things. It actually started off as a process within the pharmaceutical industry, because they wanted to put on the balance sheet the future asset value of products that were being marketed with particular sales levels. The argument being that if you're selling a patented drug, your sales are really very secure until about 2 years before your patent runs out. And therefore, if you can demonstrate a history of that kind of activity, you should be in a position where 3 or 4 years into the life of a new product, you should be able to say, well, the next 8 years of this product is actually going to be worth X. Therefore, I should be able to put that, a proportion of that, onto my balance sheet as a current asset. Because if I were to sell that product, that would be the thing that I would be calculating. That then became a standard. And people started saying, well, if you can do it with those patents, why can't I do it with these? And why can't I do that with a copyright or a trademark? And that's where it all went. And so you do now see, it's not infrequent. I don't say everybody's doing it, but it's not infrequent for balance sheets to be very significantly modified as a result of intellectual property valuation.
Any idea if there's such an outfit in the UK?
No idea.
Can you give me the name of the company that you was it MCAP?
MCAM. I'm going to look them up right now, Nick.
Thank you.
I'll do it on my other computer whilst I'm looking at these lovely faces on. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Angela, good evening. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
You've got big ambitions for 2021. Do you want to fill us in on that?
I certainly have, and I think again it goes with what was said earlier about actually bringing organisations together. You know, as it was stated earlier, there's so many organisations working in silo, and we don't have one overwhelming voice. And I think where there's lots of little voices trying to shout out into the wilderness, they all need to be brought together so that we've got one big voice to show the UK what great manufacturing industry we've got. So yeah, you know, as I think we just briefly touched on before Christmas, didn't we? The hope is to set up a manufacturing festival forum and to go out to manufacturers all over the UK and try and encourage them to have their own manufacturing festival in their area. What we'd like to try and do is to build a knowledge base to provide them with, so that they're not learning from the start, they're not making mistakes, they've got a knowledge base there to help them to set up their festival and get their names out there to their locality, to their schools, their colleges, and really get some interest. So that it's probably quite an ambitious plan, but I'm quite excited about it, and I just really hope that we can start to really make some waves in the manufacturing world.
Get noticed by people outside it. Yeah, I think it's no secret. I'm a huge fan of dealing with a lot of these issues locally, because it's in local areas that manufacturers make so much difference, and they're so rarely seen these days, unlike the old days. But that's a row I have hoed before. Well, good luck with that, Angela. And I mean, anybody, you know, just don't be shy about asking for help from anybody. If anybody wants to pitch in and help, you know, Angela's details are on the members page on the website. John, hi. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, my brain's been spinning a little bit over the last 20 minutes. Just whoever raised that topic about what role does the media have to play in this. I was envisaging, you know, how about a Horizon program on the productivity puzzle, you know, that Barry mentioned earlier. It's one of the biggest challenges to UK PLC is the whole productivity puzzle. And I'm thinking, would that program ever get made? And if not, why not? And it's kind of a circular discussion going on in my mind about people don't care about manufacturing enough to watch a documentary about it. But unless they're aware of the potential of UK manufacturing, they're not going to be interested. So, you know, I would love to see a program this year that took that the government themselves say is in the top 3 or 4 challenges pre-COVID for the nation, and see it put in the public domain. You know, is there a way any of us here can help make that happen?
Oddly enough, there's a chum and I. He's in the production business, but he hasn't got the ear of the TV commissioners yet. But we've been working for a couple of years on noodling ideas, and this is giving fresh impetus to it. It's interesting, isn't it, how this. Adrian was talking about Greg Wallace's Inside the Factory program, and people love seeing how things are made. But also, you've possibly come across the repair shop. There's a lot of interest in making, i.e. craft, highly skilled craftsmanship. And I think there's a lot of that happening as well. It's the big manufacturing bit in the middle that gets that's getting lost. But I do think that you're right. I think that would make a superb program. The question is, would enough people watch it? And that's, as always, the tricky issue. Julian.
Sorry, Adam. I know you wanted to say something. I several years ago tried to start a shopping channel, a posh one. It came to nothing. But one of the intriguing things was when we went out talking to people, because it was going to be products that we were selling, in sort of travel suitcases or whatever it might have been. I'm really picking up, John, on what you just said about, would people be interested in it? The fascinating thing was that every one of the companies we spoke to had incredible amount of media assets, because they shot advertisements. I'm talking about television now, but 95% of their marketing was rated to print advertising and, of course, below the line marketing. But now, with different media outlets, there's a lot of unutilized assets. I think if one would go, okay, it was mentioned, the cloth cap and the somebody Upert Mill, they're not going to have media assets. But if you're talking about companies like, and of course they are plundered by the television companies, like Mini, BMW, with the car manufacturers and whatever. And it's not all about robots or whatever. It's fascinating stuff, and they filmed it all very often for internal communications with staff or whatever it would be. But it's never used. I mean, it's really a message for you, Nick, that you probably know this already, or Tim, that you were referring to just now. I think if you scratch the surface, you'd find that if there was a medium, to go back to what John was saying, which I would suggest isn't a one-off Horizon program, but something that, these are long-term campaigns to change people's attitudes here. And you need something that's on a regular basis. But I think the cost of production is not necessarily as high as one would imagine.
No, I'm not sure the cost of production are the barrier to it. It's convincing people that there's an audience. And I'm going to show my age here, but I can remember 40 years ago, there were programs by Sir John Harvey Jones, going back to the factory and, showing how to improve productivity and how to make businesses successful. We almost need something like that to be pushed front and center again, because that was quite entertaining, I think, even for non-manufacturing people.
Yeah. For me, I think it comes back. Ewan's got my head spinning around, because I drew it out here as Ewan was talking about it, was that bottom up, top down, and it's almost as if you want that to happen simultaneously, as well as we've got another. I'm thinking now as well. We've spoke around another issue and opportunity around the accidental manager, which is the in-between bit. So we've got top down, bottom up, and the in-between bit that we need to concentrate on the accidental managers. But then the media needs to be going up and down the whole of that pyramid in looking at it as well. The top down is very, very important. I think this is where, from John's point of view, if the clout is at the top, it means that it's going to get the airtime. The problem is the clout isn't there at the minute, so it's not important. It's not on the radar. Put it on the radar, and it'll become important. And I think there's certain things that got to happen simultaneously. It's like be the business. Be the business is, as an example, is running across the bottom, but manufacturers alliance, is running across the bottom of the sort of thing. They're all joined up and they're all aligned with this top down as well, and then everything in between. It's and the media is running up and down that pyramid. Not easy to do,
I would say as much pyramid, because they are government sponsored and have funding and have an infrastructure there. So I think being the business is one of the places that could be instrumental in this.
I'd love to see an action plan around that, because I just think how you would say it just absolutely made sense to me. It really did make sense.
I think, can I just add, I think the interesting, almost from a program perspective, I think it's framing the question, this productivity puzzle that Barry talks about. There are companies in the UK that we know that are world beating from a productivity perspective, and that despite our high cost base, actually still knock socks off any other company in the world. I'm thinking about some of the car manufacturers. So we have got, let's say, pockets of excellence that we can stand against anybody else on a global scale and beat them. So having a program which talks about, let's say, the productivity puzzle, and say, well, how within the same country can you have this business, which is a world beater, and can generate this return on investment, or however you want to sort of define it. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got these two businesses that, you know, struggle to make ends meet, etc. You know, what, and you could get into quite an interesting sort of analysis of even within just the UK is what does that productivity puzzle mean? Because, you know, it's often quoted, and it's particularly often quoted by the politicians, and in my experience, quoted, you know, by them as almost a way of demeaning the manufacturing sector, by making it sound as though the whole manufacturing sector is inefficient because your productivity is not very good. Well, I think that's a load of absolute rubbish, and that's a polite way of saying it. You know, I think we've got some fantastically productive businesses here, but the challenge, and you know, the more that we, almost back to the point that was made right at the start, you know, what have we got to celebrate? Well, we've got to celebrate some of the best and most productive businesses globally, which we've got located here in the UK. Now, how do we how do we copy them, and how do we learn through collaboration, which is a word that's obviously being used a lot on the sort of the talk board or the chat board. I think a program around that, or a series of programs around that, would be really, really interesting, and I think perhaps could be really engaging, because, you know, you can obviously apply that not just to manufacturing but any sort of business.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Ewan, that actually what commissioners are looking for is they don't want to talk to a vertical. They want the vertical's message to make sense across the piece. So yeah, lessons learned. I mean, there's just not enough business programming anyway, to be honest. It always struck me that you know, back in the bad old days, in the 80s, everybody had industrial correspondents. They weren't industrial correspondents. They were trade union correspondents. They were only there to report on strikes. The moment the strikes started to you know, should I say, stopped as a feature of our national sporting life, they're all moved on to other duties. You can't find an industrial correspondent or an industry correspondent, maybe outside the Financial Times. It's just not interesting if there's no warfare involved.
Well, and so maybe our challenge is that we keep calling it industry.
Industry,
you know, because actually, well, maybe, you know, it's the word. This is we're not very good at showcasing ourselves. You know, speak to the kids in school. If I say I work in a manufacturing business, the eyes glaze over. If I say, well, actually, you know, how much of my business is actually more technology than manufacturing? Most of it starts with a technology perspective. You know, and I wouldn't be very good at manufacturing if I didn't use technology in the first place. So there's a messaging thing here that I think we sort of do ourselves a disservice.
Well, television doesn't actually help us. I think I'm right in saying there's a TV show series started up October, November, called Industry, but it was all about young things in the financial sector. Well, you know, finance is an industry, you know, so it's hard to get too indignant about it, but it just shows how far the as you say, the phraseology, the context has drifted away from what we're trying to achieve. 7 minutes left. If anybody hasn't, you know, got some thoughts and they haven't shared them, Mark, good evening to you. I haven't heard from you tonight. How's life in the sensors business?
Very heavily related to manufacturing and automotive, so it's pretty tough at the minute with Brexit and many other challenges. So yes, Happy New Year, and boy oh boy am I looking for a bit later on in the year.
Yeah, I'm just talking about actually one of the byproducts of Brexit. We were talking about closed markets. I don't know if you've been following this story about the people who buy mainly consumer or could be sort of hobby parts, but if whatever you want to buy from somebody overseas, your overseas supplier has to be registered for VAT.
Yeah, it's causing a lot of problems at the minute, certainly in the UK. There's not many European companies or global companies that want to register with HMRC, particularly when there's no definition of how you do it and how much HMRC is going to charge you for it.
Yeah, it's really worrying.
The Chinese historically have taken a view of just faking it and not paying for it. So that disadvantages those that do it well and those that don't.
Well, it will concentrate power in the hands of the online platforms because they've got the clout to actually manage it. But William Shatner, oddly enough, for Star Trek, he foreshadowed this several months ago and said, he has an online store selling William Shatner memorabilia, whatever that might look like. And he said, we're just going to stop. What's the bloody point?
Yeah.
And my wider point about that was going back to sort of closed markets, because eventually what it will mean is that there are fewer places for people to purchase a lot of this stuff. And so prices will rise. And we'll be back in the old days of rip-off Britain, if you remember that. Angela, yeah.
Sorry, just a quick thing, just watching the news last night, and obviously they were talking about issues with lorries coming in and out of the country and not having the correct paperwork, and they were talking about Ireland, and it really tickled me in that Sainsbury's were having trouble over in Ireland getting supplies through, and we're actually now stocking Spar products.
Well, that is collaboration for you. That works. Whatever does work. But I mean, I think, as time goes on, the situation of Northern Ireland is going to be really fascinating, and I think you're going to see a lot of industry, fingers crossed, going there, because there's how to have easy access to the EU marketplace.
Well, they were actually saying on the news last night that a lot of companies are now saying that they will not supply or they will not send online products to Northern Ireland, and they were actually interviewing people in Northern Ireland who were trying to buy products, and basically they weren't available anymore.
Yeah. I think there's going to be some tweaking to the regulations, because I think it's always, I'm not trying to bash the government. But I think that, when a civil servant comes up with an idea and you implement it, the real world has a way of biting you in the backside. Mike Morris, good evening. And Bob, just wondering if you've got any thoughts before we close on 2021.
Yeah, well, not Happy New Year, happier New Year. Yeah, I made some points here. We've been talking about leadership, about overarching strategy, about government, and about the big side of things. On the other hand, things really start to happen at the ground level. I think Richard and others amongst us are examples of that, of getting on and doing it, and also finding other people who are pushing on and doing it. I've got some people I got in mind here for you, Nick, like Chris White, the MTC, who did co-chair the cross-party committee on manufacturing. He then went on to the Industrial Strategy Group, is now with the MTC. Is a mover and knows a lot of people and can gather stuff together. David Atkinson heads up the manufacturing funding at Lloyds Bank, has been there for 5 or 6 years now, has 100 people out there, been trained up by Warwick Manufacturing Group to support manufacturing. And there's Julian Amy, who was headed up supply chain at AstraZeneca some years ago, is now at WMG. Digby Jones, whatever happened to Digby Jones? Captain of industry, passionate about manufacturing.
I know Digby. I know, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Where is he still alive?
Yes, he's a very controversial Brexiter. He's ruffled more than a few feathers online in the last few months.
Don't we need feathers ruffling?
Not the way Digby does it. Anyway.
Okay. There you go. Even Evan Davis, who's a lot on the radio, is passionate about manufacturing. So there's names out there and others. I wonder if we could pull some of these names and get them, find some way of connecting and getting some activity through them. And
maybe we just get one or two of them on a Kaizen Central to just demonstrate some of the stuff, and we go at them hammer and tongs.
Yeah.
I mean, the guys at the MTC don't need any indication. Dave Atkinson is a splendid bloke, and I'm sorry to say, Paul Brooks, I thought was going to be on tonight's program. He's from the head of manufacturing at Santander. but sadly he had to drop out at the last minute. And Bob, Happy New Year to you. I hope you're well. And if you had a final thought for us for 2021, what would it be?
Well, I've just been sat here kind of confused because, you know, like you and eventually mentioned, there are some absolutely brilliant businesses in the UK. There's a wonderful thing in positive psychology called positive deviance. And if all we did was study what they did and then adapt that to our own businesses, business could itself heal itself. I'm not a great centralist. And with you, Nick, on, I think communities are the strongest way to go forward, whether it's supply chain communities, whether it's regional communities. So seeing things like Richard's doing and how Richard is beginning to integrate himself more and more into his local community, I think that's a way where you can start to build momentum. If you can take that with Angela's perspective of how do we celebrate, is there a way of building momentum, you know, between people who are doing it and people who are coordinating it, and people like maybe you and me who can go and encourage the adoption of these, you know, much better things to do. The things that when I go into businesses, I'm always amazed at is people say, we don't have any money. If you look at their finances over the last 3-5 years and look at the best practices they've done, if they did that consistently, they'd have a ton of money, either in their working capital or in profitability. Then they say we don't have the marketplace. Well, most of them don't really define what the possibilities are in the marketplace. And when I go in and work with businesses, I find tons of opportunity. Then we look at the customers, and typically they'll be working with customers who are just bringing them down, you know, taking loads of effort and not giving much value. And they're putting so much effort into them, they're missing the opportunity to build custom with great customers. So again, there's opportunity in the marketplace. Most businesses fail to unearth. And finally, most people don't use their people effectively. So they say we don't have skills, and yet they don't use the skills they've got as effective as they could. So I'm a great believer in physician, heal thyself. And there's a huge amount of opportunity internal to business and working together and not worrying about politicians who haven't got a bloody clue. Anyway, that's me on my soapbox. Thank you very much. Good night. Happy 2021.
Well, thank you, Bob, as always. Listen, everybody, it's just gone 7, so I'll bring it to a halt. But thank you. There's lots of. I've been making furious notes here, and don't be surprised 2 or 3 of you have come back and asked for a bit more information. As always, terrific chat. Thank you so much. Very absorbing, very enlightening. Hope to see you next week. Have a great week. Have a great 2021 and Happy New Year to all you and yours. And I'll say good night. Cheers for now.